Thank you all for coming to this showcase session. What we're going to do now for the next 25 minutes or so is talk a little bit more about Wave 6. What we won't do is go into too much detail in terms of the data sitting in the report. And there's two real reasons for that. One is what you should all have within your conference pack is a copy of the actual Wave 6 report that we publish every year. So there's a lot more information in there about the insights from Wave. Also just talk about the kind of the implications for that as well. So what we thought we'd do for this session is, rather than talk about the detail of Wave, what I'd like to do is really, one, talk about the background of Wave and tell you how we got to Wave 6. And then secondly, talk about why we do Wave and why we spend a lot of time with this report every year. But then, the third thing really what I want to get across in this particular session is the most important thing for us at is how we use the data. So for us, we do Wave 6 not because it's about research and understanding or even consumer insight. It's because what we're trying to do is create consumer-driven social media strategies. So everything that we do within Wave is designed to make it actionable for clients, and that's really what we want to spend more time on. So what I'll do is I'll talk about the background of Wave. I'll show you how we develop social strategy with clients through something called Wave workshops. And then what I'll then do is hand over to James and Paul later on in the presentation, really to talk about some of those strategies and show you how they come to life. So as I said on the main stage, is that Wave provides a roadmap for us, and this is very deliberate. What we do is we use the data to create a roadmap for our clients to create social strategy. So the first thing is understanding what's happening in the social space. So what are big consumer trends. But I think the other thing that's really important to us within Wave is we think about this data from a category perspective as well, because one of the kind of key fundamental things that everyone thinks about when they think about social is, okay, what platforms can we use? How can we use that technology? What kind of things is possible? Without asking the first fundamental question, and that's really, does the consumer want a relationship with us at all? And actually what our data shows is there's lots of consumers that don't want social relationships with brands. They just want to transact and go on their way. But the second part of that is, if people do want a social relationship with us as a brand, it's important for us to understand the nature of that social relationship. So what is it they want from us? And that's our very starting point, I suppose. And the interesting thing about thinking about it in that way is you can start to see that actually there's a broad spectrum of social needs from consumers that goes from a very kind of deep level of social interaction that they want with you. So, for example, some consumers want such a deep relationship with you as a brand, they actually want to help you develop product. So that's a really deep relationship where they're actually helping you build your business. But at the other end of the scale, you've got people that just say, actually, all I want to know is tell me when your new product comes out. And I don't want any more from you than that. And there's also everything in between that scale. And I think the reason why it's important for us to understand that right at the beginning is because what we don't want to do is either spend millions of dollars on creating a creative platform sharing network that actually the consumer doesn't want. All they want to do is hear about your product. Whereas on the other side of the scale as well, what we don't want to do is create a very superficial social experience for the consumer and then actually find that they want a deep relationship with you. So it's really about understanding the nature of that social relationship right at the start, and really that sits at the heart of everything that we do. The second thing we do within that is really about understanding the power of social. So not just understanding what kind of relationship the consumer wants with us, but actually what role do the social networks play to them? What do they use those networks for? How do they behave in the social space? Are they content creators, or are they content sharers, or are they just people that want information? All of those insights are really important to us because we need to understand how people behave in the social space before we start thinking about how we interact with them. The second thing we also do when we talk about the power of social is understanding two things in particular. Firstly, it's the power of the platforms. And I'm not going to show it again, but one of the kind of maybe the most profound charts within Wave that we see is what different platforms are good at doing. So there you can see different platforms meet different needs for the consumers. And so we need to think about that when we think about how we create experiences. So in other words, if somebody's going to a forum because they want to share information, that's fine. We need to think about how we do that. But actually what we often see is things like forums are places where actually people want to go and change opinions. So we need to understand that, because actually what that means is they don't just want to have a conversation, they want to be heard and they want to feel that what they're saying makes a difference. So when we're creating social experiences, we need to meet that need. We need to make sure that they're not only being heard, but actually they feel like what they're saying is making a difference to someone. So that's really, we spend a lot of time there thinking about how they use those different platforms. And I think as well as you saw there, is it also shows you just how powerful the social networks are, because the social networks meet all consumer needs and they meet them so broadly. And that's one of the reasons why I think the social networks are growing so quickly. And then lastly, we start to think about connecting with social experiences. So by that we mean, what's the environment that we should be in? You know, should it be a smartphone-based application? Should it be on the tablet? Should it be on all of those? So we start to think about what once we've decided what the experience that we're going to create is, we then need to start thinking about the kind of platform that we should be delivering it on. So all of that data provides a direct roadmap for clients. So we start from trying to understand what kind of social experience the consumer wants with us, all the way down to the kind of platforms that we should be delivering it on. In terms of the methodology for Wave, it's an annual survey, so we do it one study a year. So as I say, we started in 2006, and I'll talk a bit of the background of that in a minute. Well, what we do is we do it online, so it's an online self-completion survey. It's the same methodology every year, and the reason we do that is so that we can compare results year on year, and we can see what the big changes are. And I think what's incredible is just the pace of change. I mean, everyone talks about the pace of change in social media, but I think it's quite startling when you see some of the changes that happen. A great example of that is I was working with our Egyptian team just 2 weeks ago, and they've been involved in the Wave study for a number of years. And when Wave 5 came out, it was really powerful for them, and they were using it and talking to clients. And then all of a sudden the Arab Spring happened. And the minute that the Arab Spring happened, the whole media landscape changed, the whole consumer landscape changed. And actually, everything that they knew about social media had changed within the space of weeks. And so when they started to look at the Wave 6 data, they could see how that landscape had changed. I mean, that's just one small example of just how quickly the whole landscape can change within one market. So that's why we always do the same methodology, so we can look at those things year on year. The results are all quantitative, and as I said before, we're in 62 countries, so it's really kind of a broad view of what we can do. We also talk to a group that we call the active internet user. So those people are on the internet every day or every other day. And the reason we talk to those people is because they're the people we can learn the most from. And they're the people that adopt social technology quickest. And they're also the people who change behavior the fastest. So actually by looking at these people now, and we found this all through the Wave studies, when we look at these people now, we learn about what people will do in the future. So now the story of Wave, and I think one of the reasons why we often talk about this is, well, there's one thing is because it's the longest and largest, longest running and largest social media study in the world. So, and we started in 2006. We've done it over 6 waves now. And the reason why I think this is quite important is because actually what it's allowed us to do, because this has been a continuous project, it's allowed us to look at social media from many different angles, and actually also allowed us to see how the social media landscape has changed, and it's changed enormously quickly. So in the first study, which we did in just 15 countries, we saw that there were lots of people engaging in social media, and there was lots of kind of communication and conversation going on. And then in Wave 2, which we did in 2007, we suddenly saw social media start to transform. So it started from people blogging and writing to each other to a platform that was actually about content creation and content sharing. So suddenly social media had moved from text-based to visual, and people were uploading their own content or sharing other people's content. But then we got into Wave 3, and here what we really wanted to know was not just what people were doing, but we wanted to understand what the impact of this was. So there we were looking at the power really of word of mouth and recommendation, because we could see here that on big retailer sites like Amazon.com. Any purchase that you made, you could instantly feedback about how you felt about that purchase. And we could also see with our previous studies that there was a lot of conversation going on and a lot of recommendation. And what we wanted to know was it influential? And what Wave 3 told us was it was really fundamental. So all these conversations that were happening online were having real effects on how people behave and also their attitudes and opinions towards brands. So we needed to understand that if we're going to engage in the social space. But actually what we wanted to do then was take it one step further. Not just understand what people were doing, but understand, and I think this is fundamental, why people engage in social media. We don't often hear that conversation, that question heard very often. It's often about the big numbers. How many people are on this platform? Which platform's growing the fastest? But the most fundamental question is asking why people are there. So what we do is we ask about each of those social platforms and what needs are being met, what very human needs are being met by each one of those social platforms. And what that told us was it's a really diverse environment and it's really a complex environment and people go there for lots of different reasons. It's not just about conversation, it's not just about sharing content. There's some very human needs that are being met by the social space. So it could be about, I just want to make myself famous. It could be, I want to change the world. It could be, I want to make money. It could be, I want the respect of my peers. And when we start to look at different social platforms in that way, understanding the consumer's motivation to get there, it explains everything we need to know about the social space. It explains everything we need to know about each one of those platforms. And so we start to use that data to then understand what the strengths and weaknesses are of the different platforms. Because we need to understand why the consumer's there. If they're looking for respect from their peers, we need to think about which platform allows them to do that and what kind of experiences allow them to get the respect from their peers. So that was Wave 4, and we've continued looking at that over time, and we've seen how that's transformed. But then in Wave 5, we called Wave 5 the socialization of brands, and actually we thought this was the area where what we really needed to do was, rather than just look at it from a consumer perspective, was start to understand what's the role of brands in a social environment. So actually, what should brands do in the social space? And that really, I think, was a real leap forward for us. So suddenly what we were starting to do was look at, for different brands and different categories, what kind of relationship does a consumer want with you? What kind of experiences are they looking for? And that was really helped us in terms of creating this roadmap and create experiences. And James will share an example of one of those experiences for one of our clients in a moment. And then with Wave 6, I think we've really kind of completed our kind of understanding and learning at this point, which is not just understanding what kind of experience the consumer wants with us, but understanding the value of those experiences. So if we do allow the consumer to share experiences with others, what does that do for us as a brand? And I think how that data is really helpful to us is it allows us to kind of turn the way that we approach social media on its head. So in other words, we start to think about what our client's objective is. Is it about making the consumer spend more time with us? Is it about making the consumer feel closer to us? Is it about getting the consumer to recommend to others? Because we understand the power of different social experiences, we can think about the objective first and then think about the social experience that best delivers it to us. And I think that's a fundamental part of creating social strategy. It's not about platforms and exploiting those platforms. It's about what's our brand's objectives, what's key for us, what is it we need to achieve, and then we start to think about the social experiences that we create. The other great thing and the way that we use Wave is because we're in 62 countries, it allows us, particularly for our clients, is to think about different geographies and different parts of the world. So what we can actually do is when we do the analysis is we can drill down very specifically into the particular market set that our clients are particularly interested in. So how do we work with Wave? Well, one of the things that we found over the last few years is less and less we're spending time actually presenting the results to clients. And I would imagine probably out of every 10 Wave sessions we have with clients, maybe only one of those would be a presentation. What we're actually starting to do now is actually to work collaboratively with our clients and actually all the other agency partners of our clients when we're thinking about social strategy is looking at the consumer insights that Wave gives us and then thinking about the implications of those in a workshop environment. And actually what we found is some really great ideas have come out of those collaborative, co-creative sessions that we've done with clients. So what happens then, it becomes no longer about the theory of social, it becomes about the application of social. And I think one of the great things as well about those kind of sessions is quite often the clients have a lot of content that's already created, or they have a lot of programs that have already been created. And actually they can bring that content into those sessions, and we can think about how we use that content within a social strategy.
Just to add to Glen's point, I mean, it also means that clients can be involved in it. You don't need to be a social media expert. So a lot of the ideas that we've come up with through Wave workshops have actually come from the client side. They haven't come from the social media teams or the teams within UM. And I think that's a very important point. It allows people to realise that it's not rocket science. It's really about ideas, understanding the audience, and then taking that to the market.
So how do we do them? I'm just going to spend a minute or two talking about how we do a Wave workshop. I mean, fundamentally, it's really about focusing on the issue. So whatever is the issue, whatever the client challenge is, we focus on that particular brief or that particular objective. And then we gather all the relevant data from Wave and start to interrogate it and think about how we use that data, how we leverage those insights. So, for example, one we're going to show here is for one of our clients, which is MasterCard, who are in the audience here today, is we were looking at affluent credit card users and thinking about how we engage with them in the social space, but also how do we engage with them with the content that we already have. And we actually did this very same exercise that I've been talking about here as we did a workshop together. So we actually sit together with the client and work on the ideas. Here's an example of the kind of agenda that we do for a Wave workshop, just so that you can see how it works. So the first thing we do is we look at those overall big trends. So what's happening in the social media space? What are the big changes? So we really understand what the landscape is. Then we look at what the campaign objective is, and we talk about the brief and what it is that we're trying to achieve. So we really understand we're starting from an objective-driven strategy, not a platform or technology-driven strategy. And then we start to drill down into the consumers. So how does our audience behave in the social space? What's their behavior? Are they content creators or sharers? Do they look for information, or do they share information? It's about understanding those very fundamental things. But it's also about understanding what kind of relationship do they want with us? What kind of relationship do they have in our category at the moment, and what kind of relationship are they looking for from us? And then what we do is we use all of that data as stimulus. So we use those insights as stimulus, and we get everybody in the room to break out into different groups. And then we ask everyone to start generating ideas based on those insights. So we start developing social strategy that's consumer driven, but is also about delivering against our particular objectives. And then we get those ideas back. And some of those ideas are ideas that we can immediately take and use them. Some of those ideas have some really kind of fundamental things that go through them that tell us how we should behave in the social space. And actually we've got lots of examples of ideas and social strategies that have been delivered from exactly this kind of experience. So the one when I was talking about Microsoft and the cloud, all of the social strategy was driven from those key insights that we had from the Wave data, which was the two needs of IT DMs, which was help me lead my company, but at the same time be there if it all goes wrong. So every idea that we then generated, every part of the social strategy made sure we were delivering on those two needs.
And I think it's worth mentioning, we also don't just use it for social media, we also now use Wave for all the digital planning. So it allows us to actually go beyond just the social domain, because more and more channels are obviously becoming social in nature.
Yeah. And so, I mean, here's an example. I'll ask James just to quickly take you through an example of the work that we did with MasterCard.
Yeah, so if you go to Facebook, and this is Witness History, so if you search for Witness History, you'll find this. This is a piece of work which actually came out of a Wave workshop we did in Eastern Europe with our clients MasterCard. And this is really interesting because firstly, the actual idea that we developed was an idea that came from one of the clients, so it wasn't, again, an idea that came from the agency side. And also, it's really allowed us to kind of take a core proposition of theirs, which is obviously the Champions League, and kind of turn it into a piece of content. So the idea we basically came up with through the Wave workshop was the idea of being a chairman of a football club. So it ticked a lot of nice boxes, and effectively we went away and sourced content where you can sign up and be a chairman of a club, you have to buy players, you have certain events happen. And this is currently running across 8 markets. It's running until the end of the tournament this time round. But it's been incredibly successful, and we've generated millions of minutes of time with consumers. So again, good example really how by starting with the insights, starting with a workshop session, we've been able to get to some really nice ideas and a really nice campaign that's delivered.
Yeah. So we're able to leverage those insights, which is that actually affluents want to learn about finance, and they want the brands to teach them new things about finance. But we did it in a very compelling way. So rather than just create, just give them information about finance, what we actually did was create a game that allowed them to financially manage the football club and develop their understanding of finance in the same way. Just before we move on to the next section, has anybody got any particular questions they'd like to ask about Wave or anything that they've seen today? No? Okay, all right, we'll move on. So that's really the fundamentally how we use Wave. What I'd like to do now is just introduce Paul Evans, who's head of media for Xbox in the EMEA region. And he'll just take you through a few examples of how this kind of social strategy that they've developed and how it's been delivered.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. So you probably saw me in the theatre just a moment ago, and I wanted to kind of pick up on a couple of the themes that were kind of discussed in there. And we were talking about kind of the commoditization of social media and how social media is more than just a Facebook strategy, right? So one of the areas we look at in Xbox is to kind of see how we can behave socially. Kind of social as a personality is kind of deeply embedded within our kind of our brand DNA anyway, and kind of social behavior within comms architectures and ideas can be incredibly powerful ways to communicate with consumers, and particularly within our category, obviously. So we're going to kind of touch on a couple of examples where we've kind of harnessed that kind of way of delivering communication. And it also kind of says, going back to the points that these guys were making on objectives as well, kind of, you can kind of set some smart, very measurable objectives within social media or within social campaigns, which don't necessarily have to be about the number of fans. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the value of a fan, and that kind of quite crude kind of attribution of ROI. So the first case study I'm going to show you is for Fable 3 Kingmaker, and the business challenge we had on that brand was within a very cluttered environment. So October, November, December is the heartland sales for any kind of core console game. To actually get standout with very low budget, and you can imagine we're kind of up against the monoliths of kind of like Modern Warfare and Call of Duty at that kind of time. So we wanted to harness the power of our early adopters, or I guess kind of like the people who we knew would be advocates already. So people who would have played the game from the previous franchise iterations of Fable 1 and 2. Bring them in early and get them to spread the word about Fable. And so we applied gamification techniques to this to create what we called Kingmaker, which was geolocation, mobile app-enabled gaming experience across multiple markets within the EMEA region. And I kind of think rather than me gabbling on, the video will more eloquently kind of describe what we did and kind of how we achieved what we did.
In October and November, a new Xbox 360 game is launched every day. How could we make Fable 3 the game to buy for fans and new gamers alike? Fable 3 was a game based on Rebel Revolution, so we created Fable 3 Kingmaker, a free app-based game that let players participate in this revolution weeks before Fable 3 was released. They took part in the revolution by using the geolocation in their smartphones. This allowed them to fight over real territory by planting more virtual flags than their enemy. To recruit players to the battle, we gave them gold for every flag they planted, territory they conquered, and treasure they found. We then built a bespoke piece of technology that allowed you to transfer the gold you had earned from your phone into the Xbox game Fable 3, something that had never been done before. To ensure the message spread to a new audience, we awarded recruits extra gold if they let their friends know of their conquests and actions through Facebook and Twitter. All this meant that when Fable 3 launched, the Kingmaker players could already purchase weapons, houses, and even castles. And that craving for gold meant that those players were happy to spread news of our revolution for us. The buzz around the game was amazing, with over 300 articles written over the opening weekend. More importantly, people who bought games loved it. When the game ended, a core group of over 93,000 fans had managed to create 20 million social media impressions. Fable 3 entered the charts at #1 and sold double that of Fable 2 in its opening week. In October and November, a new Xbox 360 game is launched every day. How could we make Fable 3 the game to buy for fans and new gamers alike?
So that was quite a deeply embedded social programmatic campaign, kind of picking up on the social, local, mobile trends at that kind of time. Using kind of digital media only to drive that kind of amplification, harness word of mouth and advocacy. We're quite lucky. I'm quite a lucky guy, kind of working on the brand I do, working with the agencies I do. So we kind of work with Universal McCann and McCann Erickson. They have distinctive roles within kind of content and media specifically, right? But as a collaborative partnership and with client as well, driving that agenda, we kind of seek to drive creativity and innovation through our media and communications kind of across the board, regardless of channel, but delivering always against the kind of very smart, straight business problems that we're trying to solve. The next example I kind of like because it uses probably, one of the more traditional mediums around, which is television. And television is probably my most favorite medium in terms of all the channels I can operate on. It's one of the most effective mediums to drive clearly incredible reach and incredible emotional involvement. So, being social doesn't necessarily always mean that you have to develop a mobile app, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to develop a Facebook strategy. What we wanted to do with Gears of War 3, and Gears of War 3 is one of our bigger franchises, right? So this is genuinely a blockbuster launch. And kind of core gaming blockbuster launches are a bit like kind of cinematic film releases. They kind of go kind of big spikes and then kind of die out very quickly. You're kind of looking for that real heavyweight impact and spike awareness through the purchase very, very quickly. One of the great things about Gears of War and also a number of the other games clearly on Xbox is the online experience, the multiplayer experience. And we wanted to harness that that very rich online, almost kind of competitive experience that the gamers are having post-launch to, I guess, maintain the momentum of the story that we're telling and the experience of the game that we're kind of trying to convey through our above-the-line communications. So I guess we'll play the video, and you'll kind of see what I mean by that.
Marcus, if you get this message, I need your help. I really am.
It's your father.
If he's still alive, I've got to find him.
Now in darkness, world stops turning. Ashes where the body's burning. No more war pigs have the power. And the God has struck the hour. Oh Lord, yeah.
It was you, breathless and torn. I could feel my eyes turning into dust.
shit.
Great, thanks. Kind of that was a first for our category as well in terms of gaming per se, bringing the online experience that people are having into their broadcast advertising experience. Nobody had done that before, and it actually required some pretty incredible TV planning and buying from the guys at in terms of being able to target kind of programming that we know would just drive frequency of message. So we're able to show that cumulative build of numbers playing online over a series of days. And as you can see, kind of being a social media expert, which I clearly am not, is not really about kind of understanding Facebook or Twitter. It's about understanding how you drive great conversations and conversations that deliver incredible response and advocacy about your brand, your communication, your messages, and the experiences that are going to drive consideration and ultimately purchase. So I kind of think that's kind of all I needed to say on social and Xbox.
Great, thank you, Paul. So I think we'll wrap up there. So if anybody has any additional questions, then please approach myself, James, Paul, or any other person that you see around, and we'd be happy to answer. But thank you all for your time. Thank you.